Well, well, well. Power scaling was a bigger challenge than you thought, huh? You got things cooking, but your fuel supply keeps drying up. There's no simple solution. Every direction you look appears more complex than the last. Your first power system went obsolete quickly. Which option will stand the test of time? Feels like making the wrong choice could leave you right back where you started next year. Guess what? I got you covered. After today, the only thing you'll be saying is welcome to the Beginner's Guide to Gregtech New Horizons. This is Episode 5, Early Power Systems. First things first, you're not alone. Gregtech power systems are complicated on purpose, and they're going to keep getting more complicated from here. But don't worry, it's not as bad as it seems. At this point, and at every point going forward, keeping your power system running will be priority number one. Allow me to clarify. Things that are not priority number one. Perfect design, beautiful aesthetic, perfect byproduct management, efficient use of resources, quest progression. Things that are priority number one. Keeping power running. Plan to power the next tier, or there is no next tier. The good news is, it's a lot less complicated than it first appears, especially now that your priorities are in order. You're an MV, so you know how to use conveyors, pumps, pipes, and wires, and that's all it takes. Part of what makes power seem complex is how many options there are. The How to Generate Power chapter is one of the first that doesn't follow an overall linear path. Instead, there are a bunch of different places you can start, each with their own line of progression. Crazy, right? You can go in any direction you want. They all work. But for beginners to Gregtech, I recommend these. Steam turbines, running on steam, of course. Gas turbines, running on benzene, otherwise known as the meta. Or combustion generators, running on fuel. All of these options can be scaled and upgraded until you get to fusion power, or even become insane themselves, much later in the game. So any way you go will work. We'll get to scale and upgrade soon enough. Here's some other options you have. Lots of things can be burned as fuel in gas turbines. Pretty much any extra gas you have laying around. Don't be afraid to supplement your fuel. Semi-fluid generators can burn your extra creosote. Not a great option, but if you're stuck, it's there. Biodiesel, if you're going benzene, you can churn out some of this too, and turn it into CTN boosted diesel later. And Essentia generators. At one time, the cat's meow. Not quite as good now, but if you know your Thaumcraft, still not a bad way to go. If you don't know your Thaumcraft, don't forget to subscribe, because we're going to cover the basics for GTNH next week. I'm not going to cover these extra options in any great detail, but they're worth knowing about for one important reason. A single source of power is a single point of failure. Whichever path you choose, as you continue down the upgrade chain, you'll continue to get better byproducts, many of which can be used for more power or can be processed into something that can be. Explore them. Having a way to get things moving again when you run out of fuel is a big deal. Yes, when you run out of fuel. The EBF is hungry, and you're about to start investing in more passive lines, and you'll be running your ore processing constantly. You'll want a second EBF, which you'll also want to run constantly. Come to think of it, you'll want a second everything, most of which you'll want to run constantly. You're going to run out of fuel along the way, accept that as a fact, and be prepared to keep making power running a priority number one again at any moment. Wait, is it time for tips already? Well, then I guess that was tip number one. Number 2, focus on critical path. Never heard of it? Allow me to introduce you. Let's say you opt for combustion. Pretty straightforward stuff we'll take a look at shortly. Here's some other things you might want to do. And if you explore NEI, you'll see even more things you can do with petrochemistry. Don't get distracted. This is still your critical path to power. Should you trash everything else? No. But until you get power working, you might as well. Stay focused. Number 3. All the crazy math and perfectly optimized setups can make it seem like it's necessary to think that hard about all this power stuff before you even try building it. It's not. It's just as good to monitor your levels and adjust the amount of input or number of machines until you get balanced production, or just upgrade when you notice your production isn't keeping up. Don't overthink this. Last thing to know before we dive in. All these options are things you're going to work towards through MV, so be prepared to keep using the steam you have, keep upgrading it if you need to, and supplement it with something else, probably light fuel to start, until you get a starter system running for your main source. You'll also need to kickstart that system until it can power itself. Now then, let's make some power. First up, steam. Once you outgrow the solar boilers, you pivot into solid and liquid fueled boilers. The setup begins with a tree farm. The LV Crop Manager will do nicely to begin, and it's easy to scale. By default, it supports an 11 by 11 by 5 space, so you can harvest 3 layers of bonsais, just saplings planted in IC2 crop sticks. IC2 crop breeding can get you absurdly productive bonsais, which is one of the ways of upgrading this setup. The others are adding crop managers or upgrading them and the size of the farms. If you want to stick to steam long term, you'll want to learn IC2 crops. Early setups will use 10 pipes to move the items out, and I usually like putting conveyors on the pipes so I can see them. Just look for the little boundary box on the side of the pipe connected to the machine and right click to place the conveyor. Then shift right click with an empty hand to access the configuration. Use import mode on the conveyor to pull items in. Large tin pipes can move lots of items, but if you're low on tin, you can jump up to electrum by mixing gold and silver. Drawers to store items, with a void upgrade on the saplings so wood never stops coming in. Then another item pipe conveyor combo to pull the wood out into a couple pyrolyze ovens running at MV. On circuit 1 to get charcoal and creosote. You need Canthal coils to get enough efficiency out of the pyrolyze oven, so this is a late MV goal. We'll cover getting it during the actual MV episode. Until then, go big with the coke ovens. Really big. Or use the charcoal pile igniter. Creosote outputs automatically into the tank, and charcoal outputs automatically into another drawer. Void upgrade on the drawer, and overflow valve on the tank set to just below the tank limit. If the production and usage isn't perfectly balanced, this will keep things moving. From here, both outputs are going into railcraft boilers for steam. Creosote into the liquid fueled boiler, and charcoal into the solid fueled boiler. You can start with a small one, and upgrade to the biggest size as you go. Once they're running, you want to keep them running all the time so they stay at temperature. As usual, Gregtech pipes with pumps on the machine side extract the goods, which you'll want to tank in a gigantic steel tank for a huge buffer, and from there, just route around your base. And lastly, a water pump to produce the water. Much better than the wooden tanks, but if you still have the 8 you were using for solar, might as well move them. They do need daylight access though for full production. In total, this is 2 layers of farm, 2 pyrolyze ovens, 2 high pressure solid fuel boilers, 1 high pressure liquid fuel boiler, 1 low pressure liquid fuel boiler, with the water pump supporting them. The extra crop manager is just for visual balance here. You only need the one with 2 layers. This is the end of the line upgrade that won't be complete until late MV, but you can start this as early as you have steel, without the pyrolyze oven and filling the charcoal by hand or feeding from coke ovens. Start with all single stack low pressure boilers and work your way up, otherwise you'll never keep up on charcoal. By the time you get to this, your steam production will be preposterous. The limiter here is actually how fast you can move it out of the boilers with MV pumps. These have 3 connections each, and it's not nearly enough. The advantages of steam are that you don't need to jump start it with fuel. Steam can be produced by machines that don't require power themselves, so you can pivot into scaling steam mostly with stuff you already have access to, and there's a ton of variety through the progression, which you'll see momentarily. The downside is, it's not very mobile. You're going to want remote fuel soon. MV miners are actually worth having, and transporting the amount of steam you'll need will require some pretty good pipes, or something better than pipes. So there you have it, steam. The upgrade path for steam looks like this. For your basic upgrades, look at your farms, your pyrolyzed coils and energy hatches, and your boilers. In the future, you can look at steel boilers, steel large turbines, and extra large turbo steam turbines. Eventually, you can get to superheated steam, with titanium boilers or solid oxide fuel cells, or large heat exchangers. Those will use high pressure steam turbines, plus large steam turbines, and they've got XL versions too. Later, there's supercritical steam, made in the extreme temperature fluctuation purification unit, and you'll use large supercritical steam turbines, plus high pressure steam turbines, plus large steam turbines, and there's XL versions once again. It gets pretty insane, and like in real life, nearly every form of power is just glorified steam. Chances are, you'll use some of this at some point. Multi-block turbines require turbine rotors, which determine power output and the flow rate requirement for fuel, and also degrade and need to be replaced over time. I'm not going to get into the math here, but there's a calculator linked in the description. Use the best thing you can afford, and once you determine the flow rate, use a fluid regulator to set the right amount of fuel into the input hatch. Next up, benzene, which can be a good pivot from steam if you want to start with one and move to the other. The first part of the setup is pretty similar to the steam we just saw. Wood farms into pyrolyzed ovens, this time on circuit 9 to get charcoal and wood tar. Canthal coils are a must here, so late MV as well. The wood tar goes into MV distilleries on circuit 3 for benzene, and the charcoal goes into fluid extractors for more wood tar to distill. This time, using Ender IO item conduits to make sure the charcoal gets split between all the fluid extractors instead of just the first one in the line. Make sure you use round robin on the export side. The only trick here is to remember machines can only output one thing automatically, either fluid or items. You get both here in the extraction, so you need to take both out, put power in, and put items in. To get access to that many faces of the machine, they can all face the same direction down the line, so you get access to the top, bottom, left, and right. I've got fluids auto-outputting to the top, so items need a conveyor. You'll need to manage the ashes you get too. If you want to see how to do it optimally, go check out the video linked in the description where Threefold explains exactly what to do. And trust me when I say you do want to do that, because having those items is extremely convenient. But we're focused on critical path here, so it's trash. Hopefully you get the idea with the item and fluid pipes by now. In short, use pumps and conveyors to get stuff in them, and plug them into a destination that can accept it. If so, this setup should make some sense. This is a nitrogen stack. The same setup 4 times. You'll definitely want to use the nitrogen recipe in the pyrolyze for better speed and cost. It's just a compressor running a cell for compressed air cells, which get auto-outputted into this tank to be emptied, then returned into the compressor with a conveyor on the side of the tank. Be sure to right-click the output with a screwdriver to allow items to be input from the output side of the machine. A pump exports the air into the centrifuge, where it gets combined with cells again to produce fluid hydrogen and oxygen cells. The fluid goes into the tank with auto output, and the oxygen cells cycle to and from the tank above using conveyors, both set to export, allow input. All 4 setups are the same, except the last 3 pipe hydrogen to the shared tank, which sends its supply along the line to the pyrolyze ovens. You could combine the oxygen into one tank too, but using a tank per setup makes it a lot easier to manage the cell cycling. You'll need a way to jumpstart the system and fill all the pipes, so either batch 10 or 12 tanks of benzene or burn a random gas you've been holding onto. Sometime during MV, you'll unlock super tanks, which you'll want to use to store a big backlog after rerouting your piping to be fed from the tank. Tiny potent piping will be plenty for that, and moving it around your base. Once again, this setup is more than you need to get started. Just 1 farm, 1 pyrolyze, 1 fluid extractor, and 1 distillery is plenty to start. And even before that, you can make batches with your coke oven charcoal. Just remember to leave yourself room to scale. For Benzene Upgrades, you have a similar basic upgrade path to go with a similar setup to Steam. For basic upgrades, look to your farms, your pyrolyze, more distilleries, and more fluid extractors, but stick to LV on those for fuel efficiency. You've also got the distillation tower for bonus output, and long-term, the multi-block fluid extractor. In future upgrades, you got the large gas turbine and the extra large turbo gas turbine. And then there's nitrobenzene, which is available in late EV and makes benzene about 5 times as effective at producing EU. 100% worth. The same turbine rules apply with gas turbines too as a means of upgrading. The upfront investment is going to feel gigantic. The number of extractors, distilleries, and turbines is pretty large. But you can see why benzene is so popular. It's all straight line stuff, and it's infinite, and you get single block generators up to IV, plus you can use the saplings in the ash output combined with another farm or 2 and make biodiesel to go with it. Synergies. Corporate buzzword of the day. Steam, benzene, and biodiesel all blend pretty nicely. The cons basically boil down to variety, which might not even be a con for you. You're so meta. And finally, petrochemistry. You already saw how to get started with oil, by pumping black gold out in the overworld. And if you missed it, go check out episode 4. So let's get the pros and cons out of the way early. The downside is, oil is not infinite in the same way steam and benzene are. Infinite oil takes much more effort, and until then, you'll have chores to do. Pumping and fetching, or pumping and updating your long-distance piping network. But the upside is, it combines what's good about both steam and benzene. Variety and synergy. There are a bunch of stages to the oil line progression, with each one getting significantly better until you get to the best fuel you can make in the early game, high-octane gasoline. Then there's that synergy. Not only do you get a ton of useful chemicals as byproducts, you also need cetane-boosted diesel anyway to power your first rocket, which is an upgrade from fuel, which is an upgrade from light fuel. That feeling you get when you randomly need an ore you've had in the chest since your first mining trip is one you'll have several times going down the oil route. Oh, I have that, is a good thing to be saying. Sometimes a thing is very easy to get in a variety of other ways. Sometimes it's not. Now, the setups. At the start, you'll be producing and burning light fuel, which you can do as early as LV. Just use an electrolyzer and some tanks to cell cycle oxygen and produce fluid hydrogen, which is sent to the chemical reactor to combine it with the sulfuric light fuel you distill from your oil. The cell cycling works the same as ever, a conveyor on the top of the machine and one on the bottom of the tank, both set to export, allow input. Learn this trick well, regardless of which setup you use. Overall, very easy and very convenient for the EBF. A couple of tanks will keep you running while your steam buffer refills. The next phase is fuel, only slightly more complicated. Same setup for light fuel as before, this time with the hydrogen being split off. Slap a miner on some oil sands ore, bring it back, centrifuge it for heavy oil, then distill that heavy oil on circuit 1. Combine with the hydrogen to desulfurize just like the light fuel. One of the two fluids needs to go in a tank so cells can be filled and put in an MV mixer with the other fluid. And since the hydrogen is in fluid form, both desulfurization recipes produce cells of fuel. With an extra tank, you can empty cells into one, pump the fluid into another, and then refill the cells to be sent on. And voila! Fuel. And a bit more than a 50% efficiency gain for your trouble. All this cell malarkey goes away in the era of multi-blocks, but you gotta start somewhere. And despite the chore of fetching the oil, this is definitely the simplest place to start with power. And after fuel, cetane boosted diesel is at HV and high octane gasoline is at EV. Otherwise, the main upgrade will be swapping the single block distilleries for the multi-block distillation tower, which will allow you to nix the oil sands and unlock easier access to the dozens of downstream chemicals of the petro line. There's also the multi-block chemical reactors, which you'll have access to in time for cetane boosted diesel if you want. By the time you're thinking about Hog, you'll have access to every multi-block you need. And you've also got a couple of multi-block options for power itself. On cetane, you've got the large combustion generator, and on Hog, the extreme combustion generator. The net out is you're going to have a really fun and interesting system to develop that will provide you with tons of the stuff you'll have to go out of your way to acquire otherwise. But you'll also have to pivot off combustion before you'd have to pivot from benzene. There's no power production that scales well into LUV from the oil line directly. By then, you might be using your fuel to make steam. So there it all is. Everything you need to know to get started with power. There's just one thing left. Where does it all go? Base design in GTNH is a big subject, and I have my own preference on how I like to do things, which you might know if you've seen the Corrupted World series. The long and short is, there's no wrong way, but there probably is an easiest way. Before we get to base design, here's some setup to justify my recommendation. You will make major updates at every tier. Pipes are a mess, just accept it. Fancy building makes a lot more sense once you can fly. And you will redo absolutely everything after AE. So based on that, I'm going to advise an expanding cave base until you come back from the moon. Simply put, it's low effort, high efficiency, and the easiest to manage for cable and pipe. You can get flight before then, but since you'll have to redesign everything for AE, I still think it makes sense to wait until you have it after your first rocket launch. Let's lay out some goals for your base. A large fuel facility, a central storage area, areas per tier, room for automation, room to farm, per machine power for full-time workers, battery banks for workshop machines, and dedicated power for the EBF. So, if those are your goals, you might want something like this. A wing-based design with the storage and EBF room in the middle, with north, south, east, and west wings for progressive tiers. 4 tiers, 4 wings. Aim for the wings to be 33 by 33, and you'll have more than enough room, and you can add wings beyond the initial grid to expand for each tier, and you can chunk align the rooms if you want. With this arrangement, you can plant your power facility just below your storage room. Regardless of what you're putting in there, the concept is the same. It's going to be a lot more efficient to move fuel than it will be to move power, so you'll be able to carve large corridors that run to large basements under each wing. Put your hand-use machines in the center of the room and scatter your passive lines around the edges, and you can plant a 16-slot battery buffer at the center. Give yourself 5 to 8 generators for the battery and use dedicated generators for all your passive lines, or wire them up on lines with at least 1 generator for every machine. Nothing fancy to it, but by the time you design your power system, launch your rocket, and come back from the moon ready to cook titanium, you'll have a much better idea of what you're going to be up against, all the things you want to store, and how you might want to design your base. Unlocking applied energistics means more than automation. It means building flexibility. You also have the portal to the personal dimension, which a lot of players use to make void bases, where the same grid-style layout will continue to work through the whole game. To get there, you'll need a ton of resources, so I hope you've been mining while you wait for your fuel buffers to fill. And now that you're well prepared to tackle the power demands of MV and beyond, you'll have some time on your hands while you wait for all that order process so you can build your setup. Next time, we'll talk about how you might want to fill that time. With magic. See you then. And hey, stay positive out there.